Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back, way back, to the sun-drenched banks of the Nile, to the land of pyramids, pharaohs, and grumpy cats. Imagine, if you will, the gentle lapping of the river against the papyrus reeds, the distant bray of a donkey, and the warm, dry air carrying the scent of baking bread and perhaps a hint of incense from a nearby temple. You're sitting on a woven mat inside a simple mud brick home, the kind where sunlight streams through a high window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. A pet cat, sleek and elegant with eyes like emeralds, is curled on your lap. One moment it's purring contentedly, a soft rumble against your hand. The next, a tail twitches, ears flatten ever so slightly, and with a low growl, it delivers a swift, indignant nip to your unsuspecting finger. A truly ungrateful little furball, isn't it? You probably won't survive a single grumpy cat encounter, let alone an entire dynasty of them. But fear not, we're here to explore the peculiar, often charming, and sometimes surprisingly effective ancient Egyptian cures for just such an affliction. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our adventure into ancient feline temperaments begins by understanding the cat's extraordinary place in Egyptian society. These weren't just ordinary house pets, they were deeply revered, considered sacred, and often seen as living embodiments of goddesses. You see, while today your cat might occasionally receive a fancy salmon pate or a new feather toy, in ancient Egypt, a cat could literally be deified. This mainstream historical fact about cats' sacred status meant they weren't just tolerated, they were protected by law, mourned upon their death, and sometimes even mummified with as much care as a human family member. Imagine a society where harming a cat, even accidentally, could lead to severe punishment, possibly even death. It certainly put a damper on, say, discipline a particularly claw-happy feline with anything more than a gentle chiding. This profound respect stemmed from a blend of practicality and spiritual belief. Cats, specifically the African wildcat, Felis libica, were first domesticated in the Near East, and Egypt quickly became a hub for their integration into human life, likely around 4000 BCE. They were superb hunters, naturally gifted at controlling pests like mice, rats, and snakes that threatened precious grain stores and household safety. Before their arrival, granaries were prone to vermin infestations, which could lead to widespread famine. So the cat wasn't just a cute companion, it was a vital part of the agricultural economy, protecting the very food that sustained the population. This practical benefit slowly intertwined with spiritual reverence, leading to cats becoming symbols of protection and fertility. But what happens when your furry guardian, instead of purring contentedly, decides it's having a bad day? When it swats at your ankles for no discernible reason, or refuses to acknowledge your presence with anything but a disdainful flick of its tail? This is where the ancient Egyptian quest for curing the grumpy cat truly begins. It wasn't about punishment, it was about restoration of harmony, a return to the natural order, because a happy cat meant a happy household and perhaps a happy goddess. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians saw grumpiness as a genuine ailment or merely a behavioral quirk to be managed through ritual and appeasement. Was it a medical problem, a spiritual imbalance, or simply a cat being a cat? We'll delve into their fascinating approaches, from soothing poultices to elaborate spells, all designed to bring your ancient Egyptian feline friend back to its purring, mouse-hunting best. This quirky tidbit of trying to cure a cat's mood reveals a surprising depth of understanding and emotional connection with their pets.
Once you've settled your newly cured cat back onto its favorite sunbeam, it's worth pondering what an ordinary day in the life of an ancient Egyptian feline actually looked like. These weren't simply creatures confined to a basket. They were integrated into the very rhythm of the household. Imagine waking with the first rays of dawn, not to the blare of an alarm, but to the soft stretch and yawn of your household cat, perhaps even a gentle headbutt against your hand, urging you to rise. Your cat's morning would likely begin, as many cats do, with a patrol of the home. You'd observe it slinking through the shadows, its keen eyes scanning for any unwelcome guests, a rogue mouse, a lurking scorpion, or even a daring snake. This was their primary job, after all, the reason they were invited into homes in the first place. You might hear the distinctive thud of a successful hunt, followed by the soft crunch of a tiny, unfortunate rodent. A quick cleanup of the evidence by the cat, and then perhaps a demanding meow for its own breakfast. Breakfast for an ancient Egyptian cat wasn't necessarily the specially prepared, meticulously measured meal our modern felines might expect. It might be scraps from the family's meal, fish, often dried or salted, perhaps some bread, or even a bit of meat. While the Egyptians revered their cats, they also saw them as practical members of the household economy. A mainstream historical fact is that cats, while valued, were often fed what was available, reflecting the practical realities of ancient diets. You wouldn't find them whipping up a special blend of high-protein cat kibble, that's for sure. After breakfast, your cat might settle in for a long, languid nap, finding the warmest spot in the house or a cool, shaded corner during the heat of the day. You'd see it grooming itself meticulously, every now and then pausing to cast a disdainful glance at the dust motes it chose not to chase. Later in the day, as the family gathered for their main meal, the cat would likely be present, perhaps weaving between legs or demanding attention with a well-aimed rub against your shins. If you were eating fish, you'd probably have a furry beggar at your feet, making its most pathetic hungry noises. Evenings might bring a bit more activity, as the cool air returned and the nocturnal rodents began to stir. Your cat might embark on another hunting expedition, or simply enjoy a playful chase of a dangling string or a rolled-up piece of papyrus. Children in the household would certainly interact with the cat, perhaps carrying it around, albeit carefully, or trying to engage it in games. A quirky tidbit is that depictions of cats playing with balls or chasing birds are common in ancient Egyptian art, suggesting that interactive play was a recognized part of their lives, helping to keep their minds and paws active. As the day drew to a close and the household settled down for sleep, your cat would likely find its preferred sleeping spot, perhaps curled at the foot of your bed, or even, as some tomb paintings suggest, sharing your pillow. Historians still argue whether Egyptians allowed cats free roam of the entire house, including sleeping quarters, or if there were designated cat areas. Given their sacred status, it's hard to imagine many Egyptians refusing a cat's chosen sleeping spot, even if it meant a furry alarm clock kneading your chest at dawn. The presence of cats in domestic scenes, lounging on chairs or beneath tables, reinforces their integral role, far beyond simple pest control. They were truly members of the family, albeit very independent, sometimes grumpy members. Of course, before we delve deeper into the remedies, let's consider what might be ailing our ancient Egyptian feline friend in the first place. Just like today, cats in ancient Egypt weren't immune to a variety of ailments. While they didn't have to worry about the latest strains of feline leukemia or the perils of processed cat food, they faced their own unique set of health challenges. One common problem would be injuries. Cats, even revered ones, were still active hunters and explorers. You might see your cat with a scratch from a territorial spat with another feline, or perhaps a more serious wound from a run-in with a snake or a scorpion. The harsh environment of ancient Egypt, with its rocky terrain and potential for dangerous encounters, made injuries a frequent concern. Parasites, both internal and external, would also be a significant issue. Fleas, ticks, and mites would have been a constant annoyance, causing itching, skin irritation, and potential infections. Internal parasites, like worms, could be contracted from eating raw prey or contaminated food, leading to digestive problems and weakness. Imagine trying to soothe an itchy, flea-ridden cat without the benefit of modern flea treatments. you'd probably be reaching for some ancient Egyptian remedies pretty quickly. Another potential ailment would be digestive upset. As we discussed, ancient Egyptian cats weren't exactly dining on gourmet cat food. Their diet, consisting largely of scraps, might lead to occasional bouts of diarrhea or constipation. A mainstream historical fact is that hygiene standards in ancient Egypt, while advanced for their time, weren't exactly up to modern standards, meaning food contamination was a risk for both humans and their feline companions. Eye infections would also be common. The dusty, dry climate of Egypt, combined with the potential for injuries and the lack of effective hygiene practices, created a breeding ground for eye problems. You might see your cat with a weepy, irritated eye, squinting in discomfort. Imagine trying to treat such an infection without the benefit of antibiotic eye drops. It would require a delicate touch and probably some rather unusual remedies. And of course, just like today, cats could experience behavioral issues. While we're focusing on grumpiness, this could manifest in various ways: aggression, excessive meowing, or simply a general lack of enthusiasm for life. A quirky tidbit is that even the ancient Egyptians likely recognized that a cat's mood could be affected by its environment and health. A cat in pain or suffering from a skin irritation is much more likely to be grumpy than a healthy, comfortable one. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians distinguished between physical and behavioral ailments in cats. Did they see a grumpy cat as simply having a bad day, or did they believe it was suffering from some underlying medical or spiritual issue? This question underscores the challenges of interpreting ancient texts and practices. We can only speculate about their precise understanding of feline health and behavior. What we do know is that they developed a range of fascinating approaches to address these issues, blending practical observation with a healthy dose of magic and superstition.
When faced with a feline displaying less than charming behavior, whether it was a sudden limp, a persistent cough, or that unmistakable grumpy glint in its eye, the ancient Egyptians didn't just throw up their hands. They turned to a fascinating blend of practical medicine, spiritual intervention, and what we might politely call folk remedies. Their approach to veterinary care, much like their human medicine, was a patchwork of observation, herbal knowledge, and a deep belief in the power of the divine. You see, while specialized veterinarians as we know them might not have existed in the same structured way, there were certainly individuals who possessed knowledge of animal ailments. These could be priests attached to temples, especially those dedicated to cat goddesses like Bastet, experienced farmers, or even just household members who had amassed generations of practical wisdom. It was a communal effort, often passed down through oral tradition rather than a formal medical profession. A mainstream historical fact is that Egyptian medicine in general was quite advanced for its time. They understood anatomy to a surprising degree, thanks to mummification practices, perhaps more than they let on, and they had a vast pharmacopoeia of herbs and natural substances. Many of the ingredients used for human ailments found their way into animal treatments, suggesting a shared understanding of biological processes. So, if your cat had a tummy ache, it might get a smaller, feline-appropriate version of the same herbal concoction given to a human with similar digestive woes. You wouldn't find a dedicated cat hospital, but rather a flexible system of care within the household or temple. Consider, for example, the use of honey. This wasn't just a sweetener, it was highly prized for its antiseptic and healing properties. If your grumpy cat had a wound from a territorial dispute, a poultice made with honey might be applied to prevent infection and promote healing. For internal issues, perhaps a bit of honey mixed with soothing herbs to calm a distressed digestive system. It's one of those practical, common-sense remedies that still holds up today, though perhaps with a few more scientific explanations. However, things often took a turn towards the less scientific. A quirky tidbit is the use of crocodile dung in some ancient Egyptian medical texts, though primarily for human eye ailments.
While there's no direct evidence it was used for cats, it highlights the more unusual and frankly somewhat questionable ingredients that found their way into their medical practices. Imagine trying to explain to your grumpy cat that its eye irritation needed a dab of that. The idea was probably that powerful, exotic substances held potent magical or medicinal properties, regardless of their actual efficacy. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians relied more heavily on empirical observation, seeing what worked, or magical belief when treating animal ailments. It's likely a complex interplay of both, where practical remedies were often accompanied with incantations or appeals to deities to ensure their success. So your grumpy cat might get a soothing herbal tea and a charm recited over it. It makes perfect sense, in an ancient Egyptian kind of way, to cover all your bases, just in case the herbal tea wasn't enough to appease the inner demon causing the grumpiness. Building upon their general understanding of medicine, the ancient Egyptians employed a remarkable array of herbal remedies to address a spectrum of feline woes, from the outwardly visible signs of grumpiness to the underlying discomforts that might cause it. Picture a quiet corner of an Egyptian home, perhaps near a sun-drenched window, where small clay pots hold dried herbs, their subtle fragrances mingling in the air. These weren't just decorative plants, they were the pharmacist's cabinet for the household's feline residents. One of the most frequently used and universally applicable herbs was papyrus. While primarily known for its use in making paper, the plant also had medicinal properties. The ashes of burnt papyrus mixed with honey or fat could be applied as a poultice to soothe skin irritations or minor wounds that might be making a cat irritable. Imagine carefully applying this paste to a particularly itchy spot on your grumpy cat, hoping for relief for both of you. It's like an ancient, all-natural version of an anti-itch cream. For digestive issues, a common cause of feline grumpiness, the Egyptians likely turned to herbs similar to those they used for humans. Fenugreek, for example, was known for its soothing properties for the stomach and intestines. A mainstream historical fact is that fenugreek seeds were found in ancient Egyptian tombs and mentioned in medical papyri for their diverse uses. It's plausible that a small amount, perhaps steeped in water or mixed into food, would be offered to a cat suffering from a stomach upset, hoping to calm its troubled tummy and, by extension, its temperament. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a digestive biscuit, but for cats. Another interesting herb that appears in Egyptian texts is castor oil. While we know it today as a laxative, it was also used topically for skin conditions and as an emollient. For a cat suffering from dry, flaky skin or irritated patches, perhaps from parasites or allergies, a gentle application of castor oil might have provided some relief, soothing the skin and making the cat feel more comfortable, thus less grumpy. It's a testament to their keen observation skills that they recognize the topical benefits of such substances. A quirky tidbit points to the potential use of poppy juice or opium for severe pain or to induce sedation, though mainly documented for humans. While we have no direct evidence of its widespread use on cats, the sheer desperation to calm a truly suffering or aggressive animal might have led to experimental applications. Imagine an ancient Egyptian trying to administer a sedative to a truly furious feline. It sounds like a task that required bravery and a very long stick. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians employed methods for pain relief in animals beyond simple soothing balms, or if the primary focus was on managing symptoms and hoping for natural recovery. The line between treating discomfort and outright sedating an animal in ancient times is often blurry. The holistic approach of the Egyptians meant they didn't just target the symptom. They understood that a cat's comfort and well-being were interconnected. So, if your cat was grumpy because of incessant itching, the herbal remedies aimed at the itch, but the ultimate goal was to restore the cat to a state of purring contentment, thus curing its grumpiness.
This meticulous attention to plant properties for animal care is a fascinating glimpse into their advanced, albeit sometimes unconventional, medical knowledge.
Beyond the tangible world of herbs and poultices, the ancient Egyptians believed deeply in the power of the unseen, and this conviction extended profoundly to the well-being of their cherished felines. For a truly grumpy cat, one whose ill temper seemed to defy all known salves and soothing words, the problem might not be physical at all. It could be spiritual. This is where magic and feline well-being intertwined, offering cures that were as much about the human's faith as the cat's affliction. You see, in ancient Egypt, every aspect of life was imbued with divine presence. Illness, whether in humans or animals, was often attributed to malevolent spirits, curses, or the displeasure of the gods. So, if your cat was unusually irritable, scratching without cause, or simply refusing to be comforted, it might be seen as possessed by a minor demon or suffering from a negative influence. This mainstream historical fact about the prevalence of magic in daily life meant that magic wasn't some dark, forbidden art. It was a practical tool, a necessary complement to medicine. The solution? Spells and incantations. Imagine a priest or a knowledgeable household elder, perhaps a woman known for her wisdom in such matters, kneeling before your agitated feline. They might recite specific verses, often drawn from religious texts or funerary spells, believed to ward off evil or appease angry deities. These weren't just whispered, they might be chanted rhythmically, perhaps accompanied by the gentle shaking of a sistrum, a percussive instrument designed to create a soothing, almost hypnotic sound. The intent was to create a sacred space, to invoke divine protection, and to literally speak the grumpiness out of the cat. Amulets were another key component of this magical medicine. Small, intricately carved charms, often depicting protective deities like Bastet or Bes, might be placed around the cat's neck, hidden in its sleeping mat, or even woven into a tiny decorative collar. The idea was that the amulet would act as a constant shield, deflecting negative energies and ensuring the cat remained in a state of harmonious balance. A quirky tidbit is that some amulets found in tombs depict cats themselves, perhaps serving as a double layer of protection, invoking the cat's own sacred power against malevolent forces. Imagine finding a tiny, perfectly carved faience cat amulet meant to ensure a happy, purring companion. Historians still argue whether Egyptians believed these magical remedies directly cured the physical ailment, or if they primarily addressed the spiritual root thought to cause the physical manifestation. Was the incantation meant to expel a demon, or simply to make the cat feel calmer, allowing natural healing to occur? It's a fascinating distinction, one that highlights the complex interplay between their spiritual and empirical understandings of the world. Perhaps, for a cat, the soothing voice and gentle handling accompanying the ritual were themselves calming, effectively reducing the grumpiness, regardless of the spell's literal power. After all, a cat often responds to a calm, reassuring presence. So, next time your cat gives you the side-eye, maybe try a calming chant before reaching for the catnip. It couldn't hurt, and it might just align your feline's aura. Moving from the esoteric to the utterly practical, let's consider the ancient Egyptian cat's dinner bowl. You might assume, given their sacred status, that these felines enjoyed a diet of pure, unadulterated luxury. However, the reality of ancient Egyptian life meant that their food choices were often a matter of practicality and availability, and this directly impacted their overall well-being and, by extension, their grumpiness levels. So, what exactly did an ancient Egyptian cat eat? The primary component of their diet would likely have been the leftovers from human meals. This could include small portions of fish, often dried or salted to preserve it in the warm climate, and possibly scraps of meat from poultry or other domestic animals. Grains like barley or wheat, which formed the staple of the human diet, think bread and beer, might also have been present, either mixed into their food or as undigested contents from the stomachs of their prey. It wasn't exactly a carefully balanced veterinarian-approved diet plan, was it? A mainstream historical fact is that fish was a very common food source in ancient Egypt due to the abundance of the Nile River. This would have provided essential protein for cats. Imagine a daily scene: the head of the household returning from the market, perhaps with a string of fish, and the family cat eagerly awaiting its share, its eyes fixed intently on the bounty. However, consuming raw fish frequently could also introduce parasites, which, as we discussed earlier, could certainly contribute to a grumpy, uncomfortable cat. Beyond human scraps, the cats were, of course, active hunters. Their diet would have been supplemented by their own catches: mice, rats, small birds, and even snakes. This natural prey provided a more complete and instinctually satisfying diet than human leftovers alone. A quirky tidbit is that tomb paintings sometimes depict cats holding birds or mice in their mouths, not just as symbols of their hunting prowess, but perhaps as a subtle acknowledgement of their self-sufficiency in dietary matters. You could say they were the original free-range pets. This constant hunting provided exercise and mental stimulation, likely contributing to their overall contentment when not suffering from, say, a swallowed mouse bone. The quality and consistency of their diet could certainly affect a cat's mood. A cat that was underfed or constantly dealing with digestive upset from a poor diet would naturally be more irritable or lethargic. Conversely, a well-fed cat whose hunting instincts were satisfied would likely be a much more amenable companion. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians had any systematic understanding of the link between diet and a cat's health or behavior beyond simply ensuring they had enough to eat. Did they consciously vary a cat's diet to improve its mood, or was it simply a matter of feeding them what was available? We can only speculate about their dietary wisdom, but it's clear that a grumbling stomach in ancient Egypt would lead to a grumpy cat, just as it does today.
Beyond what went into a cat's belly, the very environment in which it lived played a crucial role in its disposition. Imagine yourself as an ancient Egyptian cat. Your comfort, your safety, and indeed your grumpiness could all be profoundly affected by the physical space you inhabited. This wasn't just about luxurious palaces versus humble mud brick homes. It was about the subtle details of daily living. Consider the temperature. Ancient Egypt, as you know, was a land of intense heat. While cats are known for loving sunbeams, excessive heat could lead to discomfort, dehydration, and lethargy. Certainly not a recipe for a purring, contented feline. Egyptians likely provided shaded areas, perhaps cool stone floors, or raised sleeping platforms to catch any available breeze. A mainstream historical fact is that Egyptian architecture was well adapted to the climate, with thick walls and high ceilings designed to keep interiors cool. Your cat would instinctively seek out these cooler spots, perhaps under a large water pot or in a shadowy corner, trying to avoid the midday sun. Cleanliness was another factor. While the Egyptians were generally quite fastidious in their personal hygiene, household cleanliness might vary. A dusty, dirty home, or one prone to insect infestations, could be a constant source of irritation for a cat. Imagine trying to nap peacefully with a swarm of flies buzzing around your ears, or constantly scratching at a skin irritation caused by unhygienic conditions. A clean sleeping area, perhaps a regularly cleaned woven mat, would have been essential for a cat's comfort and, consequently, its mood. Noise levels also played a part. An ancient Egyptian household, particularly in a bustling city like Memphis or Thebes, could be a cacophony of sounds. The chatter of family members, the cries of street vendors, the braying of donkeys, the hammering of artisans. While some cats are more tolerant than others, a constantly noisy or chaotic environment could easily make a sensitive feline stressed and, you guessed it, grumpy. A quiet corner, perhaps a secluded chamber or a high shelf, would have been a prized spot for a cat seeking peace. A quirky tidbit is the potential impact of smoke from cooking fires or oil lamps. Ancient Egyptian homes often relied on open fires for cooking and clay lamps for light. The smoke, especially in poorly ventilated homes, could cause respiratory irritation for both humans and animals. Imagine a cat constantly wheezing or coughing. It's hardly going to be in a playful mood. Historians still argue whether Egyptians consciously designed specific cat-friendly spaces within their homes, or if feline comfort was an incidental benefit of good human living conditions. Was the quiet, shaded spot chosen for the cat, or did the cat simply find the best spot? Regardless, a comfortable environment was undoubtedly key to preventing unnecessary grumpiness, proving that even in ancient times, location mattered to a cat.
Beyond the physical discomforts of a dusty home or a rumbling tummy, the ancient Egyptians, with their keen observational skills, also paid close attention to the subtler cues of feline behavior. They might not have had a textbook on animal psychology, but they certainly developed a practical understanding of what a contented cat looked like versus one on the verge of a grumpy outburst. Imagine yourself as an ancient Egyptian, trying to decipher the complex language of a creature that communicated primarily through purrs, swats, and very expressive tail movements. One of the most telling signs they would have recognized, perhaps unconsciously, was the tail twitch. A slow, rhythmic swish of the tail often signaled contentment, a relaxed state. But a rapid, agitated twitching, particularly at the tip, would undoubtedly be a red flag, a clear indicator of irritation or impending aggression. You might observe your cat's ears, too. Relaxed and forward-facing for a happy cat, but flattened or rotated backward in annoyance. It's almost like they had their own version of a cat mood ring, just based on body language. They would also have noted changes in vocalization. A soft, trilling meow might indicate affection or a desire for attention, but a harsh, guttural growl or a sudden piercing yowl would certainly signal distress or extreme displeasure. If your cat, usually a quiet companion, suddenly started talking to you in a series of disgruntled complaints, you'd know something was amiss. This mainstream historical fact about observation is evident in various ancient Egyptian texts and art that depict cats in a variety of poses, often showing an understanding of their typical behaviors. Another key behavioral cue would be changes in appetite or grooming habits. A healthy, happy cat is usually a fastidious groomer and an enthusiastic eater. If your cat suddenly lost interest in its morning fish or neglected its meticulous fur cleaning, it would be a clear sign of an underlying issue, whether physical or emotional. Imagine trying to tempt a grumpy cat with a particularly juicy mouse, only for it to be met with a sniff and a disdainful flick of the tail. A quirky tidbit is the concept of a cat's gaze. Ancient Egyptians believed in the power of the evil eye, and some sources suggest they thought cats, with their intense, often unblinking stare, could either ward it off or, if displeased, perhaps even direct a bit of misfortune your way. So, a cat's grumpy glare might have been interpreted as more than just annoyance. It could be a subtle, magical warning, prompting a human to quickly find a remedy to restore good humor. Historians still argue whether these observations constituted a nascent form of feline psychology or were simply practical responses to animal behavior based on accumulated experience. Did they have a theoretical framework for understanding why cats behaved the way they did, or was it purely an intuitive, reactive approach? Regardless, their ability to read these subtle cues was crucial for maintaining harmony in the household and ensuring their sacred felines remained content. After all, a truly grumpy cat in ancient Egypt might not just be a nuisance, it could be a sign that the gods themselves were displeased. And you definitely don't want to upset a deity, especially not one that purrs. The immense respect shown to cats in ancient Egypt didn't end with their lives. In many cases, it reached its zenith in death. The elaborate rituals surrounding the burial and mummification of felines are a mainstream historical fact that truly underscores their sacred status. You see, when your beloved grumpy cat finally crossed the Rainbow Bridge, or more accurately, the Celestial Nile, it was not simply interred in the backyard. It was often given rights usually reserved for humans, sometimes even pharaohs. Imagine the scene. Your cherished feline, after a long life of purring and occasional indignant nips, finally passes on. The immediate reaction of the household would be one of profound grief. Families would often shave their eyebrows as a public display of mourning for a deceased cat, a quirky tidbit that demonstrates the depth of their attachment. This wasn't just a performative act, it was a deeply felt expression of loss, akin to losing a human family member. Following this period of mourning, preparations would begin for the cat's journey to the afterlife. This often involved mummification, a process synonymous with ancient Egypt. While human mummification was incredibly intricate and lengthy, cat mummification, especially for favored pets, could also be remarkably detailed. The cat's body would be carefully dried using natron salts, preserving its form, before being wrapped in layers of linen bandages. Sometimes these bandages would be artfully arranged to create a stylized cat-shaped effigy. Imagine the care taken with each wrapping, each delicate layer, a silent testament to the love and reverence for the departed animal. These mummified cats were then placed in specially crafted sarcophagi or coffins. These weren't just simple wooden boxes, they could be miniature works of art, made from wood, bronze, or even gilded cartonnage, often shaped like a cat, sometimes adorned with intricate details and inscriptions. You might find tiny, beautifully rendered cat faces on these coffins, capturing the serene, dignified expression of the deceased animal. These coffins were sometimes accompanied with small offerings, like dried fish, to sustain the cat in the afterlife, a testament to the belief that they would continue their existence beyond the veil. The sheer scale of cat burials is astounding. Vast cat necropolises have been discovered, containing hundreds of thousands, even millions of mummified cats. The most famous of these is at Bubastis, the cult center of the goddess Bastet. This discovery really drives home the widespread practice and the importance of cats across all strata of Egyptian society, not just the elite. Historians still argue whether all these millions of mummified cats were beloved pets, or if some were bred specifically for ritual sacrifice and offerings to Bastet, a more industrial-scale mummification practice. Was every mummified cat a cherished companion, or were some simply offerings? It's a debate that touches upon the complexities of ancient religious practices and our modern understanding of animal welfare. Regardless, the evidence of cat mummification speaks volumes about the Egyptians' belief in the cat's spiritual significance and their desire to ensure its peaceful passage to the afterlife, a final, elaborate cure for life's ultimate grumpiness. You definitely wouldn't want to accidentally disturb one of these sacred resting places. The cult of Bastet, the cat-headed goddess, is inextricably linked to the well-being of felines in ancient Egypt, and her influence extended far beyond mere spiritual reverence, bleeding into the practical aspects of daily cat care. You see, Bastet wasn't just a distant deity. She was a vibrant, protective force associated with fertility, home, childbirth, and, crucially, domestic cats. Her temples were bustling centers, not just for worship, but often for the care of the very animals she embodied. Imagine walking through the bustling city of Bubastis, the primary cult center for Bastet. You'd feel a sense of warmth and vitality, perhaps even the faint, happy purr of many cats in the background. Her festivals were legendary for their joyous, sometimes raucous celebrations, quite the contrast to the solemn rituals of other gods. This mainstream historical fact about Bastet's joyful nature meant that her influence on how cats were treated was almost certainly one of kindness and protective guardianship. If your grumpy cat was seen as a manifestation of a displeased Bastet, then appeasing the cat became a direct act of worship. So, how did this divine connection translate into actual cat care? Priests and priestesses of Bastet weren't just spiritual leaders. They likely acted as a kind of ancient veterinary service. If your beloved feline fell ill, you might take it to the temple,
not just for prayers, but for practical remedies. The temple compounds often housed large numbers of cats, both wild and domesticated, offering a unique opportunity for observation and the development of specialized knowledge in feline health. Imagine a priestly vet carefully examining your cat, perhaps consulting a papyrus scroll detailing herbal cures. A quirky tidbit that hints at this practical side is the discovery of votive offerings, often small bronze statues of cats left at Bastet's temples. These weren't just expressions of piety. Some might have been offerings made in anticipation of a cat's recovery, or perhaps after a successful treatment. It's a way of saying, "Thank you, Bastet, for guiding the priest's hand and healing my precious grumpy furball." This suggests a direct link between spiritual appeal and practical care provided at the temple. Historians still argue whether the medical knowledge possessed by Bastet's priests was purely empirical, what they observed worked, or if it was inextricably linked with the magical and ritualistic aspects of their faith. Did the spells work because of divine intervention, or because the calming effect of the ritual combined with a sound herbal remedy? It's likely both. The lines between medicine, magic, and religion were far blurrier in ancient Egypt than they are today. The presence of a compassionate priest, a soothing chant, and a well-applied poultice would all contribute to the cat's recovery, and thus its return to a state of contented purring. For the ancient Egyptians, a healthy cat was not just a happy pet, it was a sign of divine favor, and Bastet's influence was the guiding paw behind it all. Beyond the temples and the careful applications of herbs, the everyday lives of ancient Egyptians were filled with smaller, more intimate rituals designed to ensure the happiness and contentment of their beloved cats. These weren't grand ceremonies, they were the subtle rhythms of household life, woven into the fabric of daily interactions, all aimed at preventing that dreaded feline grumpiness. Imagine yourself as the head of a busy Egyptian household. Your cat, as a cherished member of the family, and a sacred one at that, wouldn't simply be ignored. You'd probably engage in specific actions, perhaps instinctively, to appease it. One key ritual would have been regular feeding times. Cats, as you know, thrive on routine. A mainstream historical fact about ancient Egyptian daily life is its emphasis on order and predictability, from agricultural cycles to religious festivals. Extending this to a cat's feeding schedule would have been natural. A cat that knows when its next meal is coming is generally a far less anxious and thus less grumpy cat. Imagine the soft scrape of a wooden bowl on the floor, signaling mealtime, and your cat immediately appearing as if from thin air, its tail held high in anticipation. Another important ritual was attentive observation and immediate response to distress. If your cat let out a plaintive meow or showed signs of discomfort, you wouldn't just shrug it off. You'd likely investigate, checking for injuries, offering comfort, or even seeking a remedy from your household stores of herbs. This constant vigilance stemmed from their deep respect for cats and the belief that a contented cat reflected a harmonious household. A quick glance at a drooping tail or flattened ears would prompt an immediate soothing action. A quirky tidbit that hints at these subtle daily rituals is the discovery of miniature cat collars, often made of papyrus, leather, or even precious metals, adorned with small bells or amulets. These weren't just decorative. The sound of the bell might have served a dual purpose, letting the human know where the cat was and if it was successfully hunting, and perhaps acting as a gentle, calming presence for the cat itself. Imagine the soft jingle of your cat's collar as it pads silently through the house, a constant, reassuring sound. Furthermore, offering comfortable resting places would have been a daily ritual. Cats are masters of finding the most comfortable spot, often one that is elevated, warm, or secluded. Providing them with designated sleeping mats or allowing them to share beds or cushions was a form of appeasement. It showed recognition of their needs and respect for their desire for comfort. Historians still argue whether these daily acts were conscious rituals performed with specific intent or simply instinctive behaviors born from affection and practicality. Did they explicitly think,
I am performing a ritual to make my cat happy? Or did they simply do what a good cat owner does? It's likely a blend of both, where the reverence for cats subtly influenced everyday actions, ensuring their feline companions remained purringly content, avoiding any unnecessary grumpiness. Beyond food and comfortable resting places, a truly effective ancient Egyptian cure for a grumpy cat would undoubtedly involve play. You see, cats, then as now, were bundles of instinct and energy. A bored cat is often a troublesome cat, and a troublesome cat is often a grumpy cat. The Egyptians, with their intimate understanding of these creatures, surely recognized the importance of stimulating their feline companions, not just for pest control, but for their overall contentment. Imagine a scene in a lively Egyptian courtyard. Perhaps a child, dressed in a simple saffron tunic, is dangling a dried reed or a piece of twisted papyrus in front of a sleek cat. The cat's eyes, normally narrowed in disdain, now sparkle with predatory focus. A playful pounce, a mock struggle, and then the triumphant batting of its prey. This isn't just idle amusement, it's essential for a cat's mental and physical health. This mainstream historical fact about the importance of play for animals is often overlooked, but the Egyptians, keen observers of nature, would have seen its benefits firsthand. What kind of toys might an ancient Egyptian cat have enjoyed? Simple natural materials would have been plentiful. Bundles of reeds, discarded pieces of leather, or even small rolled-up balls of linen could have served as engaging playthings. Think of a cat batting a piece of string tied to a wooden stick, or chasing a discarded seed pod across a sun-drenched floor. These weren't elaborate, store-bought toys, but they provided the necessary stimulation for a creature driven by hunting instincts. A quirky tidbit is the discovery of miniature clay figures of mice or birds in some archaeological sites, which some historians suggest might have been early cat toys, designed not just for children, but specifically for their feline hunters. Imagine a tiny baked clay mouse just waiting to be pounced upon. Interactive play would also have strengthened the bond between human and cat. When you spend time engaging with your feline, chasing a feather on a string or throwing a small ball, you're not just providing exercise, you're building trust and affection. A well-loved cat, feeling secure and stimulated, is far less likely to resort to grumpiness. It's the ancient equivalent of spending quality time with your pet, ensuring their emotional needs are met. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for playing with cats was purely for their amusement and health, or if it also served a secondary, perhaps unconscious, purpose of honing their hunting skills for pest control. Was play a deliberate act of animal welfare, or simply a byproduct of training a better mouse hunter? It's likely a blend, where the practical benefits of a good hunter seamlessly merged with the sheer joy of watching a cat in its element. Ultimately, a content cat, one whose instincts are satisfied through play, would purr rather than grumble, making life more pleasant for both feline and human in ancient Egypt. So, when your cat seems a bit out of sorts, remember the ancient Egyptians. Sometimes the best cure is a good game of chase. Delving even deeper into the ancient Egyptian understanding of their feline companions brings us to a fascinating, albeit speculative realm, their grasp of what we might call feline psychology. Did they simply see cats as instinct-driven hunters, or did they recognize the subtle nuances of their minds, the emotional states that could lead to a contented purr or a grumpy hiss? While they certainly didn't have neurobiology textbooks, their close observation and profound reverence for cats suggest a sophisticated, if intuitive, understanding. You see, for the Egyptians, the cat wasn't just a pest controller, it was a companion, a protector, and a living deity. This intimate relationship would naturally lead to a more nuanced perception of their behavior. They would have noticed, for example, that a cat that was consistently fed, had a comfortable place to rest, and was engaged in play was generally calmer and more affectionate. Conversely, a neglected or abused cat would likely be fearful, aggressive, or indeed perpetually grumpy. This mainstream historical fact about their close relationship with animals implies a practical understanding of cause and effect in behavior. One key aspect of their feline psychology would have been their recognition of a cat's independence. Unlike dogs, which are often eager to please, cats retain a certain aloofness, a sense of doing things on their own terms. The Egyptians, instead of trying to break this spirit, seemed to embrace it. They provided for their cats, honored them, but also allowed them the freedom to roam and hunt. This respect for their autonomy might have contributed to a more harmonious coexistence, fostering contentment rather than frustration. Imagine trying to force an ancient Egyptian cat to do something it didn't want to do. You'd likely end up with a very disgruntled deity on your hands. A quirky tidbit from their beliefs is the idea that cats could sense evil spirits or negative energies. If a cat suddenly became agitated, bristled its fur, or hissed at an empty corner of the room, it might not just be a sign of grumpiness, but rather an indication that malevolent forces were present. This would turn a behavioral quirk into a spiritual warning, prompting the human to take action, perhaps with an amulet or an incantation, thus indirectly curing the cat by addressing the perceived external threat. It's a fascinating blend of observation and superstition, where behavior was a diagnostic tool for spiritual well-being. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians attributed human-like emotions to their cats, or if their understanding was purely based on observable actions and their practical consequences. Did they believe a cat could feel sadness or joy in the same way a human could, or did they simply associate certain behaviors with desirable, e.g. purring, or undesirable, e.g. hissing, outcomes? The line between anthropomorphism and intuitive understanding is fine here. Nevertheless, their constant attempts to appease, comfort, and protect their felines suggest a profound empathy and a desire to see their cats thrive. This extended care, rooted in both practical observation and deep spiritual reverence, was the ultimate ancient Egyptian strategy for avoiding a perpetually grumpy cat, ensuring not just their physical health but also their mental and emotional well-being. It's a reminder that a happy cat, then as now, often comes from a happy, understanding human.
Now, as we continue our journey into the subtle arts of ancient Egyptian feline care, we arrive at a point where the mundane meets the truly unconventional, the truly fringe cures for cat grumpiness. These weren't your everyday herbal teas or soothing massages. These were methods born from desperation, deep-seated belief, and perhaps a touch of ancient Egyptian weirdness. Imagine your cat, despite all your diligent efforts with fenugreek poultices and Bastet-blessed amulets, remains stubbornly, incorrigibly grumpy. It swats at shadows, refuses eye contact, and communicates solely through aggrieved mews. What now? This is where some truly strange and, frankly, a bit unsettling remedies might come into play. One quirky tidbit, found in some medical papyri concerning human ailments, but potentially extrapolated to animals, involves the use of animal parts from powerful or exotic creatures. While not explicitly for cats, the logic suggests that perhaps a particularly stubborn grumpiness, perceived as a form of possession or deep imbalance, might require something more potent than common herbs. Imagine, for instance, a small amulet made from the bone of a crocodile, or perhaps a dried piece of a scarab beetle, believed to transfer the creature's inherent power or protective qualities to the grumpy feline. The idea was that the essence of a powerful animal could counteract negative forces within another. You can almost hear the ancient Egyptians saying, well, if the cat won't purr, maybe a bit of crocodile spirit will scare the grumpiness right out of it. Another fascinating, albeit bizarre, cure might involve ritualistic spitting. While mostly associated with warding off evil in human contexts and a mainstream historical fact of ancient Egyptian folk magic, it's not a huge leap to imagine this applied to a beloved but ill-tempered pet. Imagine a priest or a protective elder with a mouthful of water discreetly spitting a fine mist over the grumpy cat, perhaps accompanied by an incantation. The spittle, imbued with the speaker's protective intent and the water's purifying properties, was believed to cleanse and purify. It's certainly a unique way to administer a cure, and one that your modern cat would probably greet with utter disdain, or perhaps a surprisingly aggressive swat. Historians still argue whether these truly fringe practices were widespread, reserved only for extreme cases, or largely confined to the realm of magical texts and never truly put into practice. Were they desperate last resorts, or simply theoretical exercises in magical thinking? It's hard to tell. The line between accepted folk medicine and outright magical absurdity in ancient Egypt is often incredibly fine. However, these practices highlight the sheer lengths to which Egyptians would go to ensure the well-being of their sacred felines, even when faced with the most intractable of problems, like a cat that simply refused to be cheered up. It paints a vivid picture of a society that truly saw their cats as more than just animals, as beings deeply connected to the spiritual world, whose moods could hold profound significance. And for a truly grumpy cat, sometimes only the most unconventional cure would do.
Stepping back from the specifics of treatments, it's worth considering the practical side of ancient Egyptian cats, their role in pest control. While their sacred status and charming companionship are well documented, let's not forget that cats earned their place in Egyptian homes long before they became deities. They were, first and foremost, incredibly efficient furry pest controllers, and this very practical benefit underpinned much of their initial integration into human society. Imagine the sprawling granaries of ancient Egypt bursting with precious barley and wheat, the very lifeblood of the civilization. Without effective pest control, these stores would be quickly decimated by hordes of mice and rats. Enter the cat. Their natural hunting instincts, their stealth, and their sheer determination made them the ultimate defenders of the harvest. A mainstream historical fact is that the domestication of cats is strongly linked to the rise of agriculture and the need to protect food supplies. It wasn't just a happy coincidence that cats became popular, it was an economic necessity. You probably wouldn't survive a single season without them, let alone an entire civilization reliant on grain. So, when your ancient Egyptian cat seemed less than enthusiastic about chasing that rogue mouse scurrying across the floor, perhaps giving you a grumpy look instead, it wasn't just a minor annoyance. It was a breach of its fundamental duty, a potential threat to your household's provisions. A truly grumpy cat, one that refused to hunt, might have been seen as a more serious problem than a mere behavioral quirk. It wasn't just about comforting the cat. It was about protecting your livelihood. A quirky tidbit related to this is the absence of purpose-bred mousers in ancient Egyptian texts or art. While many working animals, like dogs, were clearly depicted as performing specific tasks, cats are almost universally shown in domestic settings or with sacred attributes. This suggests that their hunting prowess was so innate, so natural, that it didn't need to be trained or emphasized. They simply were the pest control. You didn't teach a cat to hunt, you just gave it access to the mice and it did the rest. Historians still argue whether the initial reverence for cats stemmed purely from their practical utility, or if their mysterious, independent nature immediately struck a chord with the spiritual beliefs of the Egyptians. Was it their efficiency as pest controllers that led to their deification, or did their inherent grace and predatory skill suggest a divine connection from the outset? It's a classic chicken and egg question. Regardless, the constant threat of vermin meant that a cat's hunting enthusiasm was highly valued. A cat that wasn't pulling its weight in the mouse department, perhaps due to chronic grumpiness, would certainly be a cause for concern and a strong motivation to find a cure. After all, nobody wants a hungry, unamused cat and a granary full of nibbled grain.
While your grumpy cat was busy contemplating whether to deign to chase that mouse, another very human concern would have been at play: The economic impact of cats on the ancient Egyptian household. You might not think of a fluffy feline as a factor in the national budget, but in an agrarian society like Egypt, every mouth to feed and every contribution to the household economy mattered. You see, a cat wasn't just a luxury item. As we've discussed, its pest control abilities directly translated into saved grain, which meant more food for the family and more surplus for trade or taxes. A mainstream historical fact is that grain was the primary form of wealth and currency in ancient Egypt. If your granary was protected by a diligent cat, you were effectively wealthier. So, a cat that was too grumpy to hunt was, in essence, costing you money. Imagine the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a performance review for your cat. "Look, Fluffy, your performance has been down this quarter. We need more mice, fewer naps." Beyond just grain, cats also indirectly saved households from the costs associated with pest damage to other goods. Mice could chew through textiles, ropes, and even wooden implements. A good mouser protected these valuable assets, reducing the need for constant repairs or replacements. This meant less money spent on new goods and more resources available for other necessities. However, cats also represented a minor economic outlay. While they often subsisted on scraps, they still consumed food. If you had a large number of cats, or particularly demanding ones, their upkeep would factor into the household's daily expenses. Imagine having to budget for fish heads for your sacred feline while also worrying about feeding your family. It's a delicate balance. A quirky tidbit related to this is the sheer scale of the cat necropolises we talked about earlier. The sheer volume of mummified cats implies a significant industry, from breeding to mummification, all of which would have had an economic footprint. Who paid for all those millions of mummified cats? It suggests a widespread willingness to invest resources in their sacred animals, highlighting their immense perceived value. Historians still argue whether the economic benefits of cats always outweighed their consumption, especially in households that might have had many felines for religious reasons. Was every cat a net positive for the household economy, or were some kept purely for their sacred status, regardless of their financial cost? This question underscores the complex relationship between practicality, reverence, and resource management in ancient Egypt. A grumpy cat, therefore, wasn't just a mood problem. It was a potential economic liability, further motivating ancient Egyptians to seek those cures to ensure their feline assets were in peak working order.
Our understanding of ancient Egyptian cat care, and indeed their understanding of a grumpy cat, isn't monolithic. Just as regions in modern times might have different approaches to pet care, so too did various areas within ancient Egypt exhibit unique nuances in how they treated their felines. Imagine traveling down the Nile, from the bustling delta to the quieter Upper Egypt, and observing subtle shifts in how a beloved cat might be managed. A mainstream historical fact is that ancient Egypt, while unified under pharaohs, was actually composed of various nomes, or administrative divisions, each with its own local customs, deities, and agricultural practices. This regional diversity likely extended to the treatment of animals, including cats. While the general reverence for felines was widespread due to their association with Bastet and their pest control abilities, the specifics could vary. For instance, in the Delta region, particularly around cities like Bubastis, where the cult of Bastet was strongest, you might find a more formalized approach to cat care. Temples dedicated to Bastet in these areas likely housed many cats, and the priests might have developed more specialized knowledge of feline ailments and behaviors. If your cat was grumpy here, you might take it to a temple clinic, where priestly healers steeped in both practical observation and divine ritual would offer remedies. Imagine a cat owner from the Delta proudly showing off their sleek, well-fed cat, perhaps adorned with a small protective amulet from a local temple.
Conversely, in more rural or agricultural areas of Upper Egypt, far from the grand cult centers, the care of cats might have been more purely pragmatic and folk-based. While still valued, the emphasis might have been less on elaborate rituals and more on simple homegrown remedies passed down through generations. A grumpy cat in these regions might receive a strong herbal concoction from the village elder, or a simple charm recited by a family matriarch, rather than a formal temple intervention. A quirky tidbit is that some regional folk traditions might have attributed cat grumpiness to localized spirits or lesser-known deities specific to their area, leading to unique, regionally distinct cures not found in the grand papyri of the major cities. Historians still argue whether these regional variations reflect true differences in belief and practice, or simply differences in the scale of archaeological discovery and the survival of textual evidence. Do we see less elaborate cat care in certain regions because it didn't exist, or because the evidence hasn't been found? Regardless, the idea of regional nuances highlights that ancient Egyptian cat care wasn't a single monolithic practice. It was a rich tapestry of approaches, woven from practical necessity, spiritual belief, and local custom, all designed to, from the delta to the desert, a grumpy cat could eventually find its way back to contentment. So, next time you're tracing the course of the Nile on a map, imagine the slight differences in how each region approached the timeless challenge of a feline in a foul mood. The ancient Egyptians' deep connection to cats wasn't just evident in their daily care or religious practices, it permeated their artistic and symbolic expressions. You see, cats weren't merely subjects for a quick sketch on a tomb wall. They were integral to the visual language of the civilization, carrying profound meanings that extended far beyond simple representation. This allowed them to convey complex ideas, including perhaps the subtle interplay of feline moods. Imagine gazing upon the walls of a beautifully painted tomb, and amidst scenes of harvests and banquets, you spot a cat. It's not just a generic feline, it's depicted with a specific posture, a particular expression. This mainstream historical fact about the detailed depiction of animals in Egyptian art reveals their keen observational skills and their ability to imbue even seemingly minor figures with symbolic weight. A cat with an arched back and bristling fur might signify danger averted, while one purring contentedly under a chair could represent domestic harmony. The most obvious symbolic use of cats was their association with Bastet. Countless statues and amulets depict her as a lioness or a domestic cat, often holding a sistrum. These images weren't just idols, they were protective symbols placed in homes to ward off evil and ensure good fortune, particularly for women and children. A cat depicted with a serene, almost watchful gaze might embody Bastet's protective qualities, reassuring the homeowner that all was well, and, by extension, that their actual cat was also spiritually secure. Beyond Bastet, cats often appeared in scenes related to fertility and abundance. Their prolific breeding habits made them natural symbols of fecundity. A quirky tidbit is the occasional depiction of a mother cat with numerous kittens suckling, a clear visual metaphor for bountiful harvests and numerous offspring in the human family. If your cat was grumpy and refusing to nurture its kittens, it might not just be a behavioral issue, but a subtle visual disruption to this ideal of abundance, signaling an imbalance that needed to be addressed. Cats also served as symbols of order and chaos. While they represented the ordered world of the home by keeping pests at bay, their wild ancestry and independent nature also hinted at the untamed forces of nature. A depiction of a cat fiercely dispatching a snake was not just a charming domestic scene, it was a powerful symbol of order triumphing over chaos, good over evil. Historians still argue whether the subtle variations in artistic depictions of cat expressions, from serene to slightly annoyed, reflected genuine attempts at capturing individual feline personalities, or if they were purely symbolic representations of emotional states tied to broader themes. Was the artist trying to capture a grumpy cat they knew, or just illustrating the concept of displeasure?
Regardless, these artistic representations offer a silent commentary on the multifaceted role of cats in ancient life and thought, revealing a society that saw much more than just a pet in their purring companions.
Now, as we near the end of our journey through ancient Egyptian feline care, it's worth taking a moment to reflect on just how timeless some of these feline dilemmas truly are. When considering ancient Egyptian cures for a grumpy cat, you can't help but notice the striking parallels between the challenges they faced and the ones modern cat owners encounter today. It's almost as if the cats themselves have remained delightfully consistent throughout millennia. Think about it. The ancient Egyptians dealt with parasites, fleas, ticks, worms. Fast forward to today, and what's one of the first things your vet talks about? Flea and tick prevention and deworming. While the ancient remedies might have involved crocodile dung or mysterious herbs, the problem was the same. An itchy cat is a grumpy cat. The practical solutions, albeit different in execution, aimed at the same goal: comfort for your furry friend. Then there's the issue of dietary upset. Whether it was too much raw fish or contaminated scraps, ancient Egyptian cats undoubtedly suffered from digestive woes. Today, we have specialized diets for sensitive stomachs, probiotics, and endless discussions about grain-free versus grain-inclusive. But the core problem of a cat with a bad tummy leading to a bad mood hasn't changed. You still find yourself wondering, what did you eat, you little terror? And of course, the ever-present problem of grumpiness itself. While the Egyptians might have attributed it to displeased deities or evil spirits, and we might talk about stress, anxiety, or behavioral issues, the manifestation is remarkably similar. The swatting tail, the flattened ears, the disdainful glare, the sudden, unprovoked nip. A mainstream historical fact is that feline behavior has remained remarkably consistent across thousands of years of domestication. Your grumpy cat today would likely fit right in with its ancient Egyptian ancestors, perhaps even sharing notes on how best to convey displeasure. A quirky tidbit that bridges this gap is the enduring power of play. The Egyptians, through their simple reed toys and interactive games, understood that a physically and mentally stimulated cat was a happier one. Today, we have laser pointers, elaborate climbing trees, and automatic feeders that dispense food based on puzzle solving. The tools are different, but the fundamental understanding that play alleviates boredom and frustration, and thus grumpiness, is timeless. It's comforting to know that even without the internet, ancient Egyptians knew a good feather wand was key to a cat's happiness. Historians still argue whether the commonality of feline issues across millennia speaks to the unchanging nature of the cat species itself, or if it highlights the universal human tendency to interpret animal behavior through our own cultural lenses. Are cats truly unchanging, or are we just projecting our modern pet concerns onto ancient times? Regardless, the shared experience of managing a grumpy cat offers a unique point of connection across thousands of years. It's a comforting thought that even in ancient Egypt, someone was probably trying to figure out why their perfectly fed, perfectly loved cat was still giving them the side eye.
Transitioning from the problems to the practical solutions, let's consider the actual tools and instruments that might have been at the disposal of an ancient Egyptian vet, whether that was a temple priest, a knowledgeable household member, or a specialized animal healer. You might not imagine anything as sophisticated as a modern veterinary clinic, but they certainly made do with what they had, often with surprising ingenuity. Imagine a small collection of simple yet effective instruments. For injuries, they might have used flint blades or bronze knives for careful debridement of wounds, similar to what was used in human surgery. Splints made from wood or papyrus would have been employed to stabilize broken limbs, carefully bound with linen strips. A mainstream historical fact is that ancient Egyptians performed complex surgeries on humans, so their understanding of basic wound care and orthopedics would likely extend to animals. You wouldn't find them performing intricate internal surgeries on cats, but external trauma was certainly within their purview. For administering oral remedies, they might have used small pottery spoons or thin bone spatulas. Imagine trying to coax a spoonful of bitter herbal concoction into a grumpy cat's mouth without getting scratched. It would have required a delicate touch and probably a very firm grip. Liquid medications might have been delivered through a reed straw or a small pointed alabaster vessel. When it came to examining a cat, the tools were simpler but still effective. Their hands, of course, would be primary. But a smooth polished stone or piece of bone might have served as a diagnostic tool for feeling for lumps or swellings. For eye ailments, a small soft linen cloth would be used for cleaning, perhaps with a drop of soothing liquid applied from a tiny slender vial. A quirky tidbit suggests the use of specially shaped bronze probes for internal examinations, though primarily for larger animals or humans. It's plausible a smaller version might have existed for the delicate work needed for felines, though the archaeological evidence is sparse. For dealing with parasites, the tools might have been even more basic. Fine-toothed combs made of bone or wood would have been used to dislodge fleas and lice. For internal parasites, the tool was often the remedy itself. Specific herbs known to be purgatives or anthelmintics administered orally. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians had any dedicated veterinary kits, or if the tools used for animal care were simply repurposed from those used for humans. Was there a specific set of tools for a grumpy cat's needs, or were they improvising with what was available in the household? Regardless, their resourcefulness allowed them to address feline ailments with the technology of their time. It's a reminder that sometimes the simplest tools, guided by careful observation, are all you need to make a difference to a suffering or simply annoyed feline.
While the general populace might have relied on household remedies and folk wisdom, the more serious feline ailments, especially those affecting beloved or sacred cats, might have warranted the attention of a higher authority, the priest. You see, in ancient Egypt, the lines between medicine, religion, and magic were often beautifully blurred. So, if your cat's grumpiness seemed truly intractable, a priest, particularly one serving Bastet, might be your next port of call. Imagine presenting your troubled cat, perhaps wrapped in a clean linen cloth, to a robed priest within the quiet confines of a temple dedicated to Bastet. This wasn't just a consultation, it was a deeply spiritual experience. The priest, steeped in both sacred knowledge and practical understanding of animals, would approach the feline with reverence. A mainstream historical fact is that Egyptian priests often had diverse roles beyond purely religious duties, including acting as healers or scribes. Their temple libraries contained not just sacred texts, but also medical papyri, some of which might have included sections on animal care. The priest's role might begin with a ritualistic examination. This wouldn't involve a stethoscope, of course, but perhaps a careful physical assessment followed by an invocation to Bastet. The priest might observe the cat's breathing, feel for swellings, or examine its eyes and fur, all while chanting prayers or reciting protective spells. The belief was that illness could be caused by divine displeasure or evil spirits, and the priest's spiritual authority was crucial in addressing these unseen forces. You wouldn't just be getting a diagnosis, you'd be getting a divine intervention. For more complex cases, the priest might consult sacred texts or divine omens. Perhaps the flight of a bird or the patterns observed in an offering would provide guidance on the appropriate course of action. This blend of spiritual and empirical knowledge was characteristic of their approach. A quirky tidbit is that some priestly texts mention specific incantations designed to cool fever or calm agitation in animals, suggesting a belief that words themselves held therapeutic power. Imagine a priest intoning ancient words over your feline, believing that the very sound would soothe its troubled spirit and thus its grumpy disposition. Historians still argue whether the priest's primary contribution to feline health was genuinely medical due to their accumulated knowledge and resources, or if it was primarily psychological, offering comfort and reassurance to the human, and perhaps, through the calming ritual, to the cat itself. Did the priest's touch truly heal,
Or did the belief in their power provide a placebo effect for both owner and pet? It's likely a combination. Nevertheless, the priest's involvement elevated the care of a grumpy cat from a mere domestic nuisance to a matter of sacred importance, ensuring that every possible avenue, both earthly and divine, was explored to restore feline contentment. After all, a happy cat meant a pleased Bastet, and that was good for everyone.
While the grand temples and their priests handled the more formal aspects of feline care, much of the everyday wisdom for managing a grumpy cat in ancient Egypt resided not in written scrolls, but in the heart of the home, folk remedies passed down through oral tradition. Imagine generations of Egyptian mothers and grandmothers sharing their accumulated knowledge about soothing a distressed feline, each whisper a tiny thread in the vast tapestry of ancient animal husbandry. These were the practical, hands-on solutions born from centuries of cohabitation with felines. They weren't necessarily documented in elaborate medical papyri. Instead, they were taught from parent to child, often observed and absorbed through daily life. For instance, a mainstream historical fact about ancient Egyptian households is their strong familial bonds and the intergenerational transfer of knowledge. It's perfectly plausible that a remedy for a cat's upset stomach, perhaps a specific blend of herbs or a particular method of applying a poultice, would be considered common household knowledge, shared among neighbors and relatives. You wouldn't consult a formal cat whisperer for every little hiss. You'd ask your auntie. Consider the simple act of gentle massage. If your cat was stiff or in minor discomfort, causing it to be irritable, a soothing rub might have been the go-to remedy. Perhaps applying a warm, damp cloth infused with calming herbs to a sore spot. This isn't groundbreaking medicine, but it's effective, and it speaks to a deep, intuitive understanding of comfort. Imagine an Egyptian child gently stroking their grumpy cat, whispering soothing words, a practice that transcends time and culture. A quirky tidbit that hints at these oral traditions might involve specific lullabies or songs sung to anxious or upset cats. While no direct evidence of cat lullabies exists, the Egyptians were known for their love of music and song in daily life, and it's not a stretch to imagine them extending this to their beloved pets. A rhythmic, calming tune might have been believed to soothe a cat's agitated spirit, working alongside any physical remedies. Imagine a soft, melodic chant designed to chase away the grumpiness and invite slumber. Historians still argue whether the effectiveness of these folk remedies was primarily due to their actual medicinal properties, or if the strong belief and comforting human interaction associated with their application played a more significant role. Did the specific herbs work, or was it the love and attention that made the cat feel better? It's likely a blend. The power of human connection, even for a stubbornly independent feline, is a profound influence. So, next time your cat seems out of sorts, remember the ancient wisdom. Sometimes the best remedy isn't something you buy, but something you share, a soothing gesture or a quiet moment of connection passed down through generations. To truly understand the ancient Egyptian approach to their feline companions, we must also consider the legal framework, or lack thereof, that governed their existence. You might not expect to find elaborate laws dedicated solely to cats, but given their sacred status and practical importance, there would certainly have been unspoken and sometimes codified rules pertaining to their care and, more importantly, the consequences of harming them. A mainstream historical fact is that killing a cat, even accidentally, could lead to severe penalties, often death, in ancient Egypt. This wasn't just a minor infraction, it was a grave sacrilege. Imagine the fear in the eyes of a passerby who accidentally stepped on a cat's tail in the bustling market of Memphis, a potentially fatal mistake. This extreme punishment highlights the profound reverence for cats, elevating them beyond mere property to beings worthy of intense legal protection. It also certainly would have made any ancient Egyptian think twice before doing anything to intentionally provoke a grumpy cat, as even accidental harm was so severely punished.
Beyond intentional harm, there would have been an implied legal expectation of proper care. While not explicitly written as "thou shalt feed thy cat 3 times a day," the general reverence for animals and the religious implications of mistreating a sacred creature would have ensured a certain level of basic welfare. A household seen neglecting its cat, allowing it to starve or suffer, might face social ostracism or even religious censure, perhaps from the priests of Bastet. It was a social contract enforced by religious belief and community pressure rather than explicit cat care laws in the modern sense. A quirky tidbit related to this is the practice of exporting cats. While ancient Egypt was fiercely protective of its felines, some cats were indeed smuggled out, often at great risk, to other lands where their pest control abilities were highly valued. However, the legal ramifications of such an act within Egypt would have been severe, akin to stealing national treasures. This indicates that cats were seen as not just private property, but national assets protected by a kind of unwritten law. Imagine the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a customs agent looking suspiciously at your wicker basket, wondering if you're trying to sneak out a kitten. Historians still argue whether the severe penalties for harming cats were primarily a result of their practical value as pest controllers, their religious significance as manifestations of Bastet, or a combination of both. Was it about protecting property or punishing sacrilege? It's likely both elements contributed to the extreme legal protection. Regardless, the powerful legal and social deterrents would have made ancient Egyptians exceptionally careful around their felines. You definitely wouldn't want to accidentally upset a cat in ancient Egypt knowing the dire consequences, ensuring that any grumpiness was met with soothing care, not further provocation.
While our focus has been on curing grumpiness, it's also important to consider the flip side. What about truly aggressive cats in ancient Egypt? Not just grumpy, but genuinely ill-tempered, perhaps even dangerous felines. Just as today, some cats might have had innate behavioral issues, or perhaps external factors like injury or disease made them truly difficult to manage. How did the Egyptians, with their reverence for cats, handle these challenging cases? It's a delicate balance between reverence and reality. While harming a cat was forbidden, the practicalities of living with an animal that posed a threat, perhaps to children or other animals, would have necessitated some form of intervention. A mainstream historical fact is that despite their sacred status, animals in ancient Egypt, including cats, could still be called or dealt with if they became a danger. This wasn't done lightly, but it was a pragmatic necessity in some extreme cases. Imagine a household facing a truly vicious cat, perhaps one suffering from rabies, though ancient Egyptians wouldn't have known the term, a very real threat in their environment. Methods for dealing with aggressive felines would likely have been as varied as their personalities. For less severe aggression, perhaps simply isolation would be the first step. Providing the aggressive cat with its own secluded space, away from other animals and small children, could help reduce stress and prevent incidents. A secluded room or even a specific outdoor enclosure might be used. You wouldn't want to encourage a cat that habitually scratched children to freely roam. For truly intractable aggression, the options would be more limited and likely more desperate. As direct harm was forbidden, indirect methods might be employed. A quirky tidbit suggests that for animals, not just cats, that were deemed incurable or dangerously aggressive, a form of spiritual re-education or appeasement to the gods might be the final resort. This could involve elaborate prayers, extensive offerings to Bastet, or even consulting oracles seeking divine guidance on how to manage or pacify the animal. In very rare extreme cases where a cat was a clear and present danger, a quiet, ritually sanctioned culling might occur. But this would be a last resort, likely carried out by priests with specific rites to appease Bastet and ensure no divine wrath. Historians still argue whether such culling was truly for animal control or primarily for religious purposes, ensuring the removal of a demon-possessed or cursed animal from the sacred human space. Was it public health or spiritual hygiene?
Ultimately, dealing with an aggressive cat in ancient Egypt would have been a profoundly challenging situation, testing the limits of their reverence. It highlights the complex intersection of their spiritual beliefs, practical needs, and the very real dangers that could arise from living in close proximity to sometimes wild animals. You definitely wouldn't want to share your home with a perpetually aggressive cat, even a sacred one, suggesting that even divine beings had their limits when it came to persistent grumpiness.
Beyond the cat's own internal state, let's consider a fascinating mirror. How did the feline's mood, particularly its grumpiness, in turn influence the emotions and well-being of its human companions? You see, the bond between humans and their pets is a powerful one. And in ancient Egypt, where cats held such elevated status, a grumpy cat could potentially cast a surprisingly long shadow over a household. Imagine a scene in a Roman home. The family is gathered, perhaps after a long day in the fields or at the market. All should be peaceful, but the household cat, usually a source of comfort and quiet companionship, is sulking in a corner, its tail twitching indignantly, occasionally letting out a low growl. How would this, the human? You might feel a pang of anxiety. Was your sacred cat displeased? Had you offended Bastet? This kind of worry over an animal's mood might seem odd to us, but for the Egyptians it was a legitimate concern rooted in their deep religious beliefs. A mainstream historical fact is that omens and divine favor played a significant role in ancient Egyptian daily life. An unhappy sacred animal could be interpreted as a bad omen, a sign of displeasure from the gods. So, a grumpy cat wasn't just a personal annoyance, it could be perceived as a small, furry harbinger of misfortune. This would certainly add a layer of psychological pressure on the human owner to cure the grumpiness, not just for the cat's sake, but for the family's spiritual well-being. Imagine trying to sleep soundly when you believe your grumpy cat is subtly inviting divine displeasure. Conversely, a purring, contented cat could bring immense joy and reassurance. Its presence would confirm divine favor, signify harmony within the home, and provide a soothing sense of peace. The psychological comfort of a happy cat would have been profound, a silent affirmation that all was right with the world. A quirky tidbit that illustrates this emotional connection is the practice of mourning rituals. The shaving of eyebrows upon a cat's death, a widely observed practice, indicates a level of grief typically reserved for close human family members. This profound sorrow suggests an equally profound joy and emotional investment during the cat's life. If you grieved that deeply, imagine how intensely you felt the daily ups and downs of their moods. Historians still argue whether the Egyptian emotional response to their cats was purely religious or if it mirrored the deep affection and psychological comfort we derive from pets today. Did they love their cats primarily because they were sacred, or did the sacred status reinforce an already existing emotional bond? It's likely a complex interplay. Regardless, the grumpy cat, then as now, had a powerful influence on the human heart and mind, proving that a cat's mood can indeed be contagious, whether for good or for ill. You definitely wouldn't want a chronically grumpy cat in your ancient Egyptian household if you wanted a peaceful night's sleep.
As we delve deeper into the mysteries of ancient Egyptian feline care, we inevitably confront the limitations of our knowledge, the lost texts and future discoveries that might still shed light on their approaches to a grumpy cat. Imagine how much more we could understand if every papyrus scroll, every hieroglyphic inscription had survived the ravages of time. You see, while archaeologists have unearthed an incredible wealth of information, much of what was written in ancient Egypt has simply perished. Papyrus, though durable in dry conditions, is vulnerable to moisture, fire, and the sheer passage of millennia. Many texts would have been lost, crumbled into dust or buried irrevocably beneath shifting sands or urban development. This mainstream historical fact about the impermanence of ancient records means our understanding is always incomplete, a mosaic with many missing pieces. What hidden remedies, what forgotten incantations, what profound insights into feline psychology might lie undiscovered, simply waiting for the spade of a future archaeologist? Consider, for example, the detailed medical papyri we do possess, like the Ebers Papyrus or the Edwin Smith Papyrus. These focus primarily on human medicine, but occasionally touch upon animal ailments, or at least suggest general principles that could be applied. It's tantalizing to imagine that a dedicated feline medical papyrus detailing specific cures for every conceivable cat ailment, including persistent grumpiness, might have once existed. A quirky tidbit is the possibility that some of these lost texts might not even have been formal scrolls, but rather small, informal household notes, or even oral traditions that were never committed to writing, making their recovery impossible. Imagine a grandma's handwritten recipe for a grumpy cat poultice, long since turned to dust. The ongoing work of archaeologists means that our knowledge is constantly expanding. Every new tomb discovered, every buried city excavated, holds the potential to reveal new fragments of information. A ceramic shard with a faded cat drawing, a tiny inscribed amulet, or even a forgotten burial site of felines could provide new clues. Historians still argue whether the most significant breakthroughs in our understanding of ancient Egyptian cat care will come from new textual discoveries or from a more sophisticated reinterpretation of existing archaeological and artistic evidence. Is the answer literally buried, or simply waiting for a new lens through which to view it? Ultimately, the thought of lost knowledge is both humbling and exciting. It reminds us that history is not a fixed, complete narrative, but a constantly evolving story. Perhaps in some distant future, an archaeologist will unearth a perfectly preserved papyrus detailing the ultimate ancient Egyptian cure for a grumpy cat. A remedy so profound, it will make us rethink everything we thought we knew about our beloved felines. Until then, we can only ponder the mysteries that remain and appreciate the fragments of wisdom that have survived.
Our journey through ancient Egyptian cat care wouldn't be complete without acknowledging how their profound reverence for felines and their accumulated knowledge of curing grumpy cats might have influenced other ancient civilizations. You see, ideas, practices, and even beloved pets often travel across borders, carried by trade, diplomacy, and conquest. Egypt, a powerful and influential civilization, certainly left its paw print on its neighbors. A mainstream historical fact is that Egypt had extensive trade and diplomatic relations with surrounding regions, including the Near East, the Mediterranean, and parts of Africa. This constant exchange wasn't just about goods, it was also about culture, technology, and ideas. As Egyptian power and prestige grew, so too did the allure of their unique customs, including their relationship with cats. It's highly probable that foreign dignitaries visiting Egypt would have been struck by the Egyptians' special bond with felines, perhaps even witnessing firsthand the careful attention given to a grumpy temple cat. So, how might this influence have manifested? The introduction of cats themselves to new regions is a direct consequence of Egyptian influence. While cats may have been domesticated elsewhere, the spread of the revered Egyptian cat, often as gifts or through trade, introduced a particular cultural context along with the animal. Imagine a Phoenician merchant returning home with not just Egyptian linen, but also a sleek Egyptian cat, bringing with it some of the associated reverence and practices. Beyond the physical animals, the knowledge of their care would likely have traveled too. If an Egyptian priest successfully cured a grumpy cat for a foreign dignitary, that dignitary might inquire about the methods, the herbs, or the rituals involved. Basic herbal remedies for common ailments, or even the practice of mummification, might have spread beyond Egypt's borders. A quirky tidbit suggests that the practice of cat mummification, though never reaching the same scale, appeared in some other regions that had strong ties to Egypt, such as parts of Nubia. This shows a direct transfer of practices related to their sacred felines. Historians still argue whether the spread of cat reverence and care practices was a direct cultural export from Egypt, or if similar practices developed independently in other cultures due to the cat's innate usefulness and charm. Was it Egyptian influence or simply parallel evolution? Regardless, the undeniable fact is that the cat's ascent from mere pest controller to revered companion often seems to follow the trade routes and cultural exchanges that emanated from Egypt. The Egyptians truly set a precedent for how humans would interact with and care for their felines, a legacy that, in many ways, continues to shape our relationship with our own sometimes grumpy cats today. It seems even ancient civilizations couldn't resist learning how to coax a purr from a reluctant furball.
As our journey through ancient Egyptian feline care approaches its conclusion, let's consider a more abstract yet profound aspect: the enduring bond between humans and cats. You see, while the specific remedies for grumpiness or the rituals for mummification might be distinctly ancient Egyptian, the underlying connection between people and their felines is a timeless thread that weaves through all of history. Imagine an ancient Egyptian sitting by a hearth, gently stroking their cat, listening to its contented purr. Now, fast forward to today. You, perhaps, sitting on your couch, doing the exact same thing with your own cat. The technology, the clothing, the language, all are different. But the simple, quiet comfort of that interaction, the reciprocal affection, is remarkably unchanged. This mainstream historical fact about the enduring bond between humans and animals, particularly companion animals, transcends time and culture. It's a fundamental aspect of the human experience that has remained constant for millennia. The reasons for this bond are as complex and multifaceted today as they were in ancient Egypt. There's the practical benefit, of course. Pest control was vital then, and a form of companionship is vital now. But beyond that, there's the unique personality of the cat itself. Independent yet affectionate, mysterious yet comforting. Their soft fur, their gentle purr, their playful antics, these are universal appeals. A quirky tidbit is that even the very grumpiness we've been discussing can, paradoxically, deepen the bond. When a cat trusts you enough to show its true, sometimes prickly self, and you respond with patience and understanding, it strengthens the relationship. It's a sign of a unique connection, a challenge that, when overcome, leads to greater affection. Historians still argue whether the depth of this human-animal bond in ancient Egypt was primarily a religious phenomenon, driven by the sacred status of cats, or if the reverence was a cultural expression of an already deeply felt affection. Did they truly love their cats first and then make them sacred? Or did the sacred status compel their affection? It's a fascinating question, and one that perhaps doesn't have a single answer. It was likely a beautiful feedback loop. Affection led to reverence, and reverence reinforced affection. As we wind down our tale, consider your own relationship with your cat. The frustration of a sudden nip, the joy of a contented purr, the quiet comfort of a furry presence beside you. These are the echoes of ancient Egypt, resonating through time. The Egyptians, with all their elaborate rituals and quirky remedies, understood something fundamental about these creatures. That beneath the occasional grumpiness lies a deep capacity for companionship, and that caring for them in all their complexity enriches our lives in profound ways. So, as you drift off, remember that you're not alone in your love for your feline friend. You're part of a timeless tradition stretching back to the dawn of civilization.
As the whispers of ancient Egypt fade and the peculiar tale of curing grumpy cats settles gently in your mind, allow yourself to simply relax.
The journey through sun-drenched homes and bustling temples, the contemplation of sacred rituals and practical remedies can now softly recede, leaving behind a comforting sense of calm. Imagine the gentle lapping of the Nile, no longer a river of historical intrigue, but a soothing, rhythmic sound. Let the scent of ancient herbs, once a focus of feline medicine, now simply drift as a pleasant, calming fragrance. The images of majestic cats, once a source of historical curiosity, now become soft, furry silhouettes, curled in peaceful slumber, their purrs a faint, comforting hum in the distance. The weight of historical facts, the debates of scholars, and the quirky tidbits of ancient life can all gently lift, like motes of dust settling in the still air. Feel the subtle shift in your breath, slowing, deepening, as the whispers of the past give way to the quiet present. There is no need to decipher ancient texts, no need to appease a grumpy godcat, no need to prepare a complicated herbal poultice. All that is left is the simple act of being, of letting go. Remember the quiet comfort of a purring cat, that universal signal of contentment that transcends time and place. Let that image, that feeling, wrap around you like a warm linen blanket. The Egyptians understood the profound peace that a happy feline could bring, and tonight you can feel that same ancient, enduring calm. The complexities of history have done their work, guiding you to this moment of serenity. So, dim the last light in your mind. Let your thoughts float away like papyrus boats on a calm river, and embrace the deep, restorative quiet. The grumpy cats of ancient Egypt are purring now, content and dreaming, and so, too, can you.